Hey students, Mrs. Muffin here, and I'm ready to make some art with you. Today, for our lesson, we are going to focus on self-portraits. With a lot of my lessons, I use some sort of book to introduce the subject that we're focusing on, but for today, I'm just going to show you examples of self-portraits. Self-portraits are something that will change throughout your lifetime if you keep practicing that skill. They come in all shapes and sizes, and they look different depending on who creates them. The goal of a self-portrait is to capture more than just what a person looks like, and to capture what's inside of them, their essence, who they are as a person. Some of you have been learning about civil rights and government and identity in your classes. Some of you aren't, and that's fine. Either way, it's an awesome goal to try and accomplish capturing who you are as a person visually. Before we get started with our art lesson, we need to make sure we're mentally and physically ready. My recommendation is that you take a few deep breaths. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. You can take as many of those deep breaths as you need to until you feel mentally ready for art. Make sure your space is ready. If you have things all over your desk and you don't have space to create your art, take a break and clean up that area. Make sure that you have an open space with the correct supplies that you're going to need for art. If you've been sitting all morning working on math, language arts, and your other subjects, and your legs are tired, get up, walk around the house, stretch your legs a little bit. Do some actual stretches like you might do in PE. If you need to, get a snack, go to the bathroom, do whatever you need to do so you can focus on art. If you're thinking about how your legs need to stretch, you're gonna have a hard time thinking about your art project. If you're mentally ready for art, time to make sure you have the supplies necessary for today's lesson. Today's lesson is making a self-portrait, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. I will start by saying, for supplies, you're going to need some paper, somewhere to put your self-portrait. I'm using a thicker piece of cardstock for my self-portrait today. It's a watercolor paper, but you might not have this at home, and that's totally okay. Because we're at home learning, and we're not at school where Mrs. Muffin's just handing you a piece of paper, we have to be creative and problem solve and figure out what we can make our art on. You might have an art notebook, you might have a lined notebook, you might have computer paper. Use whatever you have available to you that you have permission to use to make your art today. So the first thing you need is paper. The next thing you need is a pencil. I like drawing with a mechanical pencil, but you can use a regular pencil. Either way, you're going to want an eraser, but the type of pencil you use is totally up to you. You can also use markers or permanent markers for this lesson. Again, it's going to be up to you. I would wait and see the examples and get some ideas before you pick your supplies. The last thing you're going to need is something to make your portrait colorful. If you want to do a very detailed self-portrait using pencil or charcoal and you don't want to include color, I'm going to be okay with that, as long as I see that you really put the effort in. If it takes you 2 minutes and you draw a stick figure, have you put the effort in? No. In that case, you're going to need a lot of color to make up for the fact that you didn't spend a lot of time drawing. So if you spend more time drawing, you might not need any color or as much. If you create a simple image and you spend a little less time drawing, I want you to include some color. I want to see that you spent time on this project and really thought about it. In my example, I use watercolor paints, color pencils, and crayon. I also use a thin black pen like this. I know a lot of students aren't going to have it, but it's something that I happen to have in my art supplies. I like to outline my images sometimes, not always, and I wanted to use a very thin line pen. Keep in mind, if you use pen to outline your images and then you use watercolor paint, the water will smudge that ink unless it's a permanent marker. This pen has permanent ink, a Sharpie is permanent. Now that you have some ideas for some of the supplies you can use for this art lesson, let's talk a little bit more about it. Earlier, I mentioned that I would show you some examples of portraits. I'm going to start with some examples that I've created over the years. This portrait was one that I did in college, and my teacher specifically asked us to do quick paintings with watercolor. We weren't allowed to paint more than maybe a minute, and we had to try and capture the essence or the feeling of what we looked like. So it's kind of like if you were to squint your eyes really tight and maybe it was raining, it was like, what do you see? What's in the mirror if you're not looking for very long? And this is what I came up with. Now, some of you might be saying that's not a very good self-portrait. Art's one of those things where some people are going to love this and some people are going to hate it, and that's okay. I actually quite like it because I think that it captures that essence of who I am. that energy or feeling of what might be there if you only saw me for a quick second, maybe on a rainy day. Here's another example of a self-portrait I did of myself, very similar to the one you just saw. It's a quick capture, almost like you took a camera and shook it while you were taking the picture. I used to wear glasses that were square and I had short hair, and I wanted to play with some fun colors. My skin has never been green, even when I felt like puking a little bit, and my hair was never yellow like that. But I had some fun with the colors, and you can have fun with your colors today too. Self-portraits do not have to be realistic looking, and they do not have to have realistic colors to be good. Here's a portrait that I drew about 4 years ago. This might be more of a portrait that a lot of you students are used to seeing, and a lot of you students are trying to create. It's a little more realistic, there's some shading, and it kind of looks more like me at that time. I drew this portrait for my students as a hello at the beginning of the school year. Now here's a portrait I drew this year. It wasn't really a self-portrait, it was more of just a portrait of a girl and her cat, but it was loosely inspired by me. It's got the curly red hair, which I had especially when I drew this, and it's got a fluffy black cat just like I have. This portrait was a combination of black pen, like that thin one I showed you, and watercolor paint. And I was having fun mostly experimenting with the watercolor. My goal wasn't really to make it look like me, my goal was to have fun with the watercolor paint. This last example of portraits that I created was also from this year, 2020, and I used thin black pen and watercolor paint once again. I wanted to experiment and try out different ways to draw cats, and to show myself doing some yoga, and to show myself just standing there. I was having fun experimenting. They don't look realistic. The more that I draw over the years, the less I want to draw realistic. It's a fun skill to practice, and sometimes my creations turn out great, and sometimes they're not so great. But my goal more and more is to create fun, colorful art that expresses who I am as a person, and not necessarily what I look like. Now I'm going to show you some examples of portraits created by artists that are creating art now. We would call them contemporary artists. Their portraits are so different. None of them look alike. And they use different styles and colors to express who they are and their personality. And they have different goals for their self-portraits. Some of them are very realistic, but a lot of them aren't at all because, again, they're not trying to capture what they look like, but who they are. Here's the portrait that I'm going to draw, and you're going to see the video of me showing how I created it. In the end, it's not my favorite portrait. I just showed you some portraits that I like better than this one, but that's totally okay. That's what art is. It's a practice. We keep going. We love some of them. We don't love some of them, but we move forward and we keep creating. We keep practicing. Some days are better than others, and that's a-okay. This first portrait might be one that you recognize from the artist Vincent Van Gogh. He's the guy who chopped off his ear. And more importantly, he painted Starry Night. His portrait is pretty realistic, but if you look closely, there are a lot of lines and dashes that aren't realistic. Most of us don't have skin that looks like that, with all those lines and dashes, and there's greens and different colors that you wouldn't expect when you were creating a realistic portrait. But Vincent Van Gogh wasn't trying to create a realistic portrait. He was trying to create a portrait that showed and expressed how he felt. How do you think he felt when he was creating this portrait? Was he happy? Was he sad? Was it sunny outside? Was it a rainy day? Was he hungry? How was he feeling? And what makes you think that? When you create your portrait, try to think of ways that you can express how you're feeling, what's happening in the world around you that day. Here's another portrait that you might find familiar, Frida Kahlo. In this portrait, she has her pets. There's a monkey and some sort of cat. But then she has a lot of other images and symbols and things that might seem strange and confusing to us. She was trying to express her pain, the things she was going through, in visual ways. I don't think she actually had a necklace of thorns around her neck, cutting into her and making her bleed, but she might have felt that way. She might have been experiencing some physical pain, some mental pain that made her feel like she was wearing that necklace. How can you create a portrait that describes what you're feeling, even if you can't draw exactly what you're feeling? Here we have 3 portraits, all done by one person. Does anyone know who painted these? Pablo Picasso. In the first image, we see a painting he did when he was 15 years old. Pretty realistic. Just like I was mentioning earlier with my portraits, it's pretty common for artists to want to figure out what they look like on the outside, but then as you get older, you try harder and harder to create portraits that express who you are and not necessarily just what you look like. Flash forward 10 years and we see a painting he did of himself when he was 25 years old. Not very realistic at all, but Pablo Picasso is one of the world's most famous artists who have ever lived. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people liked his art? If it doesn't look realistic and like a photograph, is it just as valuable or beautiful? Last, we have a painting he did of himself when he was 89 years old. At this point, it looks barely human, and the colors don't resemble any person I've seen in real life. Why do you think they changed so much over time? Why do you think they got less and less realistic? How do you think that Pablo Picasso viewed himself? Here's a fun portrait by Norman Rockwell. I love Norman Rockwell's art. It's very realistic, but it's very playful. He likes to have fun. He likes to make a joke of things. In this self-portrait, it's a painting of him painting himself. He has some examples of famous portraits from Rembrandt and Van Gogh and Picasso to inspire him. He's making a mess, creating his art, and he's got a mirror to look in. He's really having some fun with this. Do you want your portrait to be fun? Do you want it to be serious? What do you want it to express? There's a lot of different things that make each of us who we are. Some days we're happy, some days we're sad. Some days I want to paint a portrait where the colors are subdued and gray and sad, but other days I want them to be bright and colorful. I change all the time, and that means so will my self-portraits. Here we have a portrait from a children's book illustrator, Robbie Catherine. Robbie's portrait doesn't look just like a photograph, does it? It's not super realistic, but it does look like a person. It's more of an illustrative style, like you would find in a children's book. I really like that they included their earring and their fun curly hair. It's what things make you unique visually. What do you want to include in your portrait? Whenever I draw a portrait, I always like to make sure I include my curly hair or my braids because those things make up who I am as a person visually. What matters for your viewers to see when they see a picture of you? I also love that Robbie filled up the background with lots of fun patterns and colors. Here we have a self-portrait from an Australian artist, Ginger Taylor. Ginger does a lot of really cool street art and sign art. I really love this portrait that she created because she uses it as an opportunity to talk about something that bothers her, anxiety. A lot of us deal with anxiety, and I think a lot of you fifth graders know all about what anxiety is and when it happens. Ginger wanted to create a visual illustrating the way she felt. It's almost like anxiety is happy to be there, but Ginger's not happy that anxiety is there. How can you express or create visually images that show how you feel when sometimes it's hard to draw exactly what a feeling looks like? This example comes from a local artist right here in Salt Lake City. They go by Trashpaca, and they sell clothing and create visual art and make beautiful jewelry. What I love about Trashpaca's portrait is that it has a whole collage of things that make up that person. Even without knowing them, I feel like I know the things they like, the things they're interested in, and I get a feeling for the type of person they are. This is the type of portrait I chose to do. In the center, there's a self-portrait, and then around me there are different objects or symbols that show what things matter to me and what kind of person I am. I also love the colors that Trashpaca uses. They keep it simple, but fun and colorful. Here are a few more examples to help you brainstorm. Okay, let's see how I drew my self-portrait. Now, there are a lot of ways to draw a self-portrait, but basically any kind of realistic portrait is going to start with a few basics. For the head, it's kind of an oval shape, like an egg. And then everyone's face is pretty much symmetrical, meaning one side matches the other. So if we were to, in pencil of course, draw a line down the middle, and I do it really lightly so that I can erase it later. If you do heavy dark lines like that, you're gonna have a hard time erasing that later. And then when you go erase it, you might be able to see here, there's still a mark. You can cover up that mark, but it's a little easier if you use nice light lines like this. Your eyes are gonna be kind of up here, not in the middle, because your nose is in the middle, right here. That's where your nose would be. I'm not gonna draw my nose like that, I'm just showing you. Your mouth would be right below your nose like this. And then your eyes are gonna be right in here. There are lots of videos all over the internet that really help you out with this, and I'll be sure to add some how to draw portrait videos to my YouTube channel, so that if you feel like you want help beyond this, if you want to practice this skill, you can have some resources for that. But that's the basic with a face. Those are the proportions that most of us have. Now, nobody's perfectly symmetrical. My eyes are not symmetrical. One of my eyes is bigger than the other, and it's a little higher than the other, and one of them stays open a little more than the other. That's totally normal. And if you look at a lot of faces and you start studying celebrities, your family, friends, anybody, you're gonna notice nobody's face is symmetrical. It's totally normal to be unique and different and have mismatched facial features, basically. So that's the basic way I would draw a face. What's nice is I drew lightly over in pencil, so I can draw over these features and erase what I don't want later. Now, like I mentioned, you can go on a realistic route and practice that skill, but that's a skill that can take a lifetime to master, or at least years. And so right now, I want you to really focus on making a portrait that represents who you are as a person, and maybe not so much what people see when they see your face. You might look in the mirror and see exactly what you look like, but that's not the purpose of this self-portrait. The purpose of the self-portrait is to express who you are on the inside. It's to express what makes you, you. So when you think of me, I'm sure you think of one thing, at least I do, cats. Of course, I like art and all sorts of other things, but cats are the first thing that I think a lot of people think of. I don't even mind that, honestly. I think that cats represent me. They like their space, but they're very loving and friendly when you get close to them. They're independent, they like the outdoors, they love naps. All those things describe me too. So when I think of myself, I think of cats. Now I've got cats. I could just draw a cat and say it's a self-portrait of me, but I want to think outside of the box here. I'm going to think, how could I incorporate cats in a picture that includes me? One option is I could draw cats around my face. I could make my face out of a bunch of different cats. There are a lot of options here. And in fact, on the back, I might list things that I think represent me. Cats, art, so here are some things that I thought of that really represent me and who I am and what matters to me. And so I want to try and incorporate them somehow into my portrait. Sometimes when I think about how to draw a feature, I feel frustrated and I don't feel successful. So what am I going to do? I'm going to turn it right back around again, and I'm going to practice drawing that facial feature. Right now it's noses. This is another great item to Google is practicing drawing facial features, and I can try and find some videos or some resources to add to the page for that. You can do a nose that's like an upside down question mark. You can do an upturned nose, and it can have the nostrils, or it doesn't have to. There's all sorts of ways to draw noses. This is also a good time if you have a mirror, or you could go in the bathroom. You could pull out a mirror, there's my face, and you can use that to help you draw your pictures. I'm gonna set my mirror right beyond my picture. so that I can use it to look at while I draw. Some people's noses kind of go out more like that. Some people's noses turn up more. My nose goes down pretty straight here, and then I've got my nostrils here. That's one way I might choose to draw my nose, but I often find with art less is more. So maybe my nose really looks like that, but maybe I don't want to include every little detail. I'm going to think to myself, how can I simplify this image? So if my nose kind of looks like that, maybe I could just do one or two lines. That's why I'm experimenting on the back. I'm gonna play around until I feel like that's, you know, where I want to be. If it helps, I could draw kind of eyes. Those eyes look a little crazy, that's okay. I think I'm gonna go something pretty simple with two lines like that, and I can decide later if I want to add more detail. The mirror is also helpful because it helps me see kind of how far apart my nose is. I just look at, well, how big are my lips? My nose is almost as wide as my lips, so that helps me know, okay, if my lips are here and my nose is almost as wide, then this is how big my nose should be. And I'm just drawing lightly because then I can go back and erase things I don't like. You know what's great too, if I'm feeling frustrated with my nose, I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna try something else. Keep going. Now I can try and draw my eyes realistically. I'm gonna go a little more cartoonish. I'm gonna skip right to my eyeliner. And it's a drawing, so I can change things up if I want. Maybe my eyelashes aren't as long and beautiful as this, but I can make them like that. It's a drawing, I can do what I want. And now maybe, oh, I added my eyes. I want to change my nose up. That's fine too. Drawing hair, I like to draw the shapes of it first, and then I can go back and add those details. I have braids, so I'm going to try and draw kind of the shapes of the braids. Looks a little interesting. I might end up turning that into something later, we'll see. Now remember, I want to try and add in some of those elements that make me who I am. So I'm gonna add some cats. I have two cats. If you've seen my video, it's Vivian and Kato. Actually, I'm gonna do Vivian eyes differently. He's got these big yellow eyes. Keep in mind, I've drawn myself before. I've also drawn cats before. I've drawn a palette before. This isn't my first time. If you're sitting down and this is the first time you've ever drawn a portrait or some of the shapes you're trying to draw, do not compare yourself to other people who have done it before. And if you go on YouTube and you watch these how-to videos, keep in mind those people teaching those videos have drawn that image tons of times before they got to the point where they decided to make a video. So if you need to do a lot of practice to get to the point you want to be, that's totally normal. Nobody's just gonna pick up a pencil and know exactly how to draw something and it'll make sense in their brain. And if they do, awesome, you have a talent, take it away, become a professional artist, because that's a rare talent. I grew up in California, very near to the ocean, and so I went ahead and drew some waves. Oh, you know what I want to draw? I want to draw clouds, and they're going to be rainy. Not because I'm sad or anything. Sometimes people, associate that with rain, but I just love rain. I think it's because where I grew up in California, it rained a lot. And so I think I miss that rain. I grew up near redwood trees, so I want to draw some nice tall trees. Feeling nostalgic today, I guess. And this is not my first tree I've drawn, by the way. I've drawn them a lot. I've had a lot of practice. And even then I look at my trees and go, oh, that's not very good. It's all perspective, right? Some people will look at my art and think, oof, not very good. And some people will think, wow, I wish I could do that. Believe me, I look at other artists and think, wow, I wish I could do that. But I could, just would have to practice. I think my picture is full enough. I can add some more clouds, but I think I like it. I might change some things on my face. That's totally okay. It's art, you can change as you go. But at a certain point, I also need to just say, that's okay, I'll leave it how it is. If you want to outline your image with different markers or pens or anything, you can. I think today I'm going to stick with color pencils to start with, but I'm going to do some fun colors today. You can erase all those extra pencil lines, or you can leave them and just layer on top of them. I like having the mirror here because I'm noticing shadows that I'm seeing, and I can add those in looking right at that mirror. Thing about a portrait is you can make yourself look like what you want to look like. Maybe my eyeliner doesn't look that good today, but it doesn't matter. It's my portrait. I get to make it look how I want it to. not think about a lot with eyes is that they actually do have some pink in them, usually on the edges. Like I said, you can use any supplies you want on this project. You could make this collage, color pencil, crayon, watercolor, as long as it's two-dimensional and you're trying your best to make it represent you. And effort's what really matters here. If you only use pencil, that's fine, but I better see that you've drawn and really put the effort into it. If it's more simple, it needs to have a lot of that color. I started with color pencil, some black pen. Now I'm gonna go in with some paint. And these are just my regular Crayola paints that a lot of you students have. This technique works really good with crayons because you get that wax resist with your paint. Vivian is a black cat, but sometimes in watercolor I do him a little lighter so you can see some of the details of his fur. I'm creating this look by just adding water on top of my watercolor, and it's gonna make everything kind of ooze and blend together. Right now my brush only has water on it, so when I go on top of where I've already painted, it's gonna ooze that paint around and it's gonna look a little more natural and flowy. You can also do the reverse. Start by painting clear water on your area, and then I'm gonna go back with the paint. So now I've got paint, and when I paint on it, it picks up in some of that water and gets a little more oozy like I like. Those are nice and wet, so the cheeks are gonna spread out really nicely. This paint right here, this blue, is a type of gouache. It's a type of watercolor. I ran out of one of my watercolor paints in my tray, so I filled it with this paint. And that's why it's a little more opaque, meaning it's not see-through. And it's a little bit of a different color than you might get in a Crayola set. I've used my little brush for all of this painting, and I could finish the entire painting with that brush, but I happen to have a large brush, and sometimes they're really nice when you have a larger area to cover with paint. For clouds, I'm going to pre-wet my paper, and this is going to create that nice wet look, just like clouds. Because it's already wet, when I come in with my color, I could just do like kind of little dabs like that, and it's gonna ooze and spread just like a real cloud would. Just doing random shapes. I made the gray color by mixing some blues, some black, some brown, a few colors like that to give it this color. I added a little bit more blue. Color I'm using is a very light pink mixed with some browns because I have very pink skin. If you want to paint your skin tone, you might need to use yellows, browns, pinks, a little bit of purple or blue. I recommend on a piece of scrap paper mixing around those colors and seeing what you come up with. But most skin is going to have those browns, yellows, blues, pinks. And because we all have different skin tones, it's going to be more brown for some people, less brown, but you'll have to experiment because there's so many different skin tones and variations out there. You'll have to practice to get the right one for you. I think I'm all done with my self-portrait. I've captured what I wanted to capture in my picture. You might notice that I listed another item or two that I didn't include in my picture, and that's okay. Sometimes I change my mind as I go. As you look at your picture, you might see little things like that you forgot that you want to go back and fill in, but at a certain point, just stop. That's a hard thing to learn in art, is how far to go. Sometimes we want to keep adding and drawing and layering, and sometimes that is good and it adds more to our pictures, but sometimes we ruin things that we liked before. So at a certain point, stop. But if you see things like right now as I'm looking, I'm going, oh yeah, I didn't color in this doorknob. You can color in your doorknob. But if you're just going back and adding and going, oh, my nose isn't perfect. I already did my nose. That's not the best nose I've ever drawn in my life, but it's fine. Yeah, I'll finish this self-portrait and I'll make another one. That's how art works. It's a lifelong practice. You're never gonna have that perfect nose, so it's okay if you stop on this project at a certain point and say, this practice is done. Next time I'll do a better nose. I hope you had fun though, and please, please, please share your art with me. If you don't want me to put it on the school gallery, just let me know and I won't, but I still want to see your art even if you don't want it on the school gallery.